Welcome back to another edition of the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. My name is Andy Barch with AM 930 WEOL and 100.3 FM. As always, I am joined by Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and of course, BrownZone.com. Scott, great to be joined by you as always, and we're talking about a Browns loss, unfortunately, today. Browns fell to the Steelers 20-13, and Scott, this one was certainly a gut punch. No question about that, all things considered, knowing what was on the line as well here. So we'll begin, Scott, with your three major takeaways from Sunday's loss to the Steelers.
Yeah, we're going to start with the fact that they got up 10-0 and weren't able to keep it, right, and maintain it and finish it, really. And it reminded me of a lot of times that I've been to Pittsburgh. I think I've been to every Pittsburgh game since the Browns have come back in Pittsburgh. And the Browns have started fast a few times and not been able to seal the deal. And this reminded me of that. It reminded me of, as far as we think the Browns have come, they still haven't come far enough. And I think that was driven home by the fact that they got up early and then give up 20 straight points. My second takeaway would be the fact that they couldn't, and this plays off the first one, the fact that they couldn't capitalize in the big moments. And it's been a theme all year, and Freddie Kitchens has driven the point home. But there's a couple of points in the fourth quarter, right? They get the interception from Terrence Mitchell and go 3 and out and have to pooch punt, and the offense can't score. And Jarvis Landry has a chance to make a play deep down the field, and it's a catch he makes before. It's a tough one. It's over his back shoulder. The cornerback gets a hand in there. But if he makes it, it's a different game. And then they have another chance. The defense has a chance from the half-yard line to stop the Steelers, get great field position, maybe even get a safety, and you win the game with the safety and a touchdown. And on the first down, they give up a 12-yard run right up the middle. It's those big moments where you go, this team isn't ready. And if you're John Dorsey, and if you're the Haslams, and even if you're Freddie Kitchens, I think you feel like there's plenty of talent for this team to be ready. So why isn't it getting the deal done? And then my third would be, I'm disappointed in the cornerback play. And there's plenty of factors in the game, right? And we'll talk about Baker, and we'll talk about a bunch of other things. But you're playing Devlin Hodges and the undrafted rookie quarterback making a second start. And if Greedy Williams and Denzel Ward and TJ Carey can run step for step with James Washington and just break up a couple of those deep balls, it's a different game. That felt like the only offense that the Steelers had was Hodges drops back. He has time because the Browns are missing Myles Garrett and the Steelers have a pretty good offensive line. And he just throws it up down the sideline, and his guy went and made a play. And Denzel Ward's the number 4 pick in the draft. Greedy Williams was the second-round pick, but the Browns' first draft pick this year. You need him to play better in the big moments. And that's just continuing the theme. But those are the three things that really, really jumped out at me.
And there's a lot that jumps out about this loss because while mathematically the playoffs are still a possibility, you'd like to sit here and think, realistically, the playoffs probably aren't going to happen. The best you can do is go 9-7, but now you're a couple of games behind the Steelers and you're well behind the pack. So we'll come back around to some of that a little bit later on. In a minute here, I want to hit on this T-shirt debate because it depends on which side of this ledger you fall on here, but there are a lot of people that think that was a pretty bad look. We'll dive into Baker as well. We'll also get into Chris Smith getting released and the frustrating mounting for OBJ about him not getting the ball nearly enough. But let's start with the shirt. When this came out at the end of last week, there were some people that looked at it and they were kind of fired up about it. And, Scott, this is the kind of thing I think that, about 20 years ago, I think this fan base really would have gotten behind Freddie Kitchens wearing that shirt. But, boy, today's climate is just so different. And you just like to think that the head coach would know better.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's the bottom line is why? What benefit do you have from wearing it? And I know what he'll tell you. He'll tell you his family bought him the shirt. It's kind of a gag gift, and his daughters wanted him to wear it, and they were going to see the Mr. Rogers movie, so he did. I think as a coach, you have to say, kids or darling, whatever he calls his girls, right? Sweethearts, I can't do it. I appreciate the gift. I can't wear this out. What if I get seen? What if somebody asks me to take a picture? It's not the first time Freddie's been in public and a fan has asked him to take a picture. I just think he has to know better. And you're right about the 20 years ago thing. Today's coaches are way more CEO than they used to be. And we could argue about whether that's good or bad, but that's the way of the world today in the NFL. And that's not a CEO move. And I think we've seen too many not CEO moves from Freddie Kitchens, and I'm not sure that plays in 2019 in the NFL. And maybe it does if you win a bunch, right? And maybe Freddie will get that chance, and he'll win a bunch, and it won't matter, and he can be a little eccentric or whatever you want to call it, have his own personality. Not a cookie cutter coach, like he's got a quarterback who's not a cookie cutter quarterback. But I just don't think it's a good look, and I just think he has to know better. And I didn't like the fact then that after the game Sunday, he said, "I do it again." It feels like he didn't learn the lesson. And if you're going to say that, you might as well just go all in on it. And he could have worn the T-shirt to the game on Sunday, right? And like, screw it. This is who I am. We're going to stick it down Pittsburgh's throats. Now, if you don't, it looks even worse, right? And you get more backlash than he did. And I think he tried to walk that middle ground and couldn't. Like, I'm sure the advice he got was, "Hey, Freddie, let's walk it back." And he couldn't do it. And he gets up there and he says, "I do it again." And I don't like that. And I'm not saying it's a fireable offense, but I think if you're John Dorsey and you're the Haslams, when you look back at the end of the year and go, okay, let's evaluate our first-time head coach, that goes in the pile. And I'd like your opinion on this. I've been having this talk with some of the other writers. I wonder how much, did it actually affect the game? And my opinion is no. Pittsburgh's already motivated. It's a huge game. We all know what happened November 14th. We know what's at stake with the division and the playoffs. We know the rivalry. So I don't know if this played any factor in the game. The counter-argument is that the Steelers and a couple of veteran guys, Ramon Foster and David DeCastro, say, yeah, it's stupid, and it gave us bulletin board material. So if a coach should know that, right? Freddie should know that, and he talks about his players not doing anything to hurt the team, and it's tough to quantify if this hurt the team or not, but I think it's probably safe to say it didn't help the team.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, look, you're right. It probably didn't have much of an impact on the outcome of the game for sure, but look, some guys need that extra edge.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've been around football guys long enough. You know how those guys are structured. They're wired a different way. Some guys search for that extra edge, and for some of them, maybe this was just what they needed. They needed that extra edge, and I think to me, I don't personally have a problem with them wearing that shirt, but I also understand, too, that not just the Browns and the Steelers, but the NFL in general is trying to put that fire out that was created a couple of weeks ago. They're doing everything they can to make that problem go away, and all wearing that shirt does is bring it right back to the forefront. And I think that's the major issue everybody has. As ugly as that situation was a couple of weeks ago, we're trying to forget about it, hard as it might be, but you've got to take the appropriate steps to move forward and forget about it. And, all I think that they did with that T-shirt was pour gasoline in the fire.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially from a league perspective. And to me, it's different than the Steelers showing up at the game wearing free Pouncy shirts, right? It's even different than D. Haslam wearing the 95 hat the week before in honor of Myles Garrett. That's like a show of support. This is almost a middle finger to Pittsburgh, right? And I think it conflicts with, after the game, Freddie said, we're embarrassed. And I thought he struck the right tone following the November 14th game. And since then, he got to talk to Myles, and Myles told him the racial slur accusation. And that changes how you view this situation. But it doesn't change the fact that Myles Garrett went too far and hit Rudolph over the head with the helmet. And I think as a head coach, you want to rise above, and you want to keep in mind the big picture of our guy went way over the top, and he's lost to us for the rest of the year, and that's going to hurt our chances to reach the playoffs, and it certainly hurt their chances against the Steelers. Myles Garrett was missed tremendously in that game because they did not get the pass rush they needed, and they would have gotten from Myles Garrett. It changes how the rest of your defense plays. And taking all of that into consideration, it doesn't matter that Pittsburgh started it, right? It's a cute shirt. I get that fans would wear it. It's not appropriate in my mind. It's not evil, but it's not appropriate for the head coach to wear that shirt. And I'm just going to say it again. I think he should have known better. And that bothers me that he didn't know better.
It's tough to get around that. You're right. He should have absolutely known better. It's okay for fans to do certain things and say certain things. It's not okay for coaches to say and do certain things. And again, there's a double standard there that exists, but there's no beating around the bush there. It is what it is. But, and it's interesting because I think there are people on both sides of this thing. And it's fascinating to me because, I just think as a coach, you just have to know better.
Right. I agree. And I will say this. I think Freddie's point about it not being the tipping point is probably true, and I would point to the fact that the Browns are up 10-0. So if the Steelers were that fired up, you would have seen it early in the game.
Yes.
And maybe they stayed fired up longer because of what Freddie did or the T-shirt. But I don't think it affected the game. I just don't like it, and I don't think there's any benefit to him wearing it.
Well, and to make matters worse, you end up losing a game in Pittsburgh that a lot of people looked at on paper and thought, man, they should have won this one. I mean, look, the Browns were decimated by injuries to that defensive front, no question about that, but that was certainly no excuse. I mean, the Steelers were on their third-string quarterback, and they had plenty of injuries along the way at the skill positions as well, so both teams were beat up, and if the Browns were to stay alive in the playoff race, they were going to have to win this game on Sunday. Is devastating too strong of a word to describe the loss on Sunday, or is that spot on?
No, I think that's spot on. Devastating, crushing, disheartening, all those things. And you mentioned some of the reasons the playoff hopes take a huge hit. Now, if they swept the final four games, there's a chance we're talking about tiebreaker scenarios, right? But in order to sweep, not only have to beat the Bengals twice, which they should do, you got to go to Arizona and win, and you got to come home and beat the Ravens, who are playing the best football in the National Football League, and will want revenge given what happened in Week 4. So you have to sweep to get to 9-7, and then you have to hope that Pittsburgh falls apart, Tennessee falls apart, and somehow you win some kind of tiebreaker, right? So when we were all right that the playoffs are all but eliminated, that's why, because a bunch of stuff has to go right, and I think ESPN has them at a 5% chance. And I don't always buy into that, because a lot of subjective stuff goes into how they come up with that formula for predicting playoff chances, but there's no way in my mind it's higher than 10% that they're going to the playoffs. So that's the first one, right? Big picture, they blew the playoff chances. Number two, they talked a lot about becoming the new captain in the rivalry, right? And we're going to show Pittsburgh and all that stuff. Well, they didn't. They blew a chance to sweep the season series for the first time since 1988. They've lost 16 straight in Pittsburgh. So it's going to be a mental block next year when you would think that they're hoping to get to the playoffs again, right? Because the talent's not going away. The expectations are going to be big again next year. Maybe the hype won't be the same, but the expectations will be big again. And they're going to have to go into Pittsburgh and win a game. And they haven't shown that they can do that. And Pittsburgh was decimated by injuries. And while I know everybody gets paid, and they're all NFL guys, you do have to take that into consideration. And the fact that Devlin Hodges is playing quarterback, and James Conner's not playing running back, and Juju Smith-Schuster's not playing receiver, and Marquise Pouncey's not playing center, that should have balanced any losses that the Browns had on defense with Myles Garrett and Demarius Randall and Morgan Burnett, right? And Olivier Vernon's not 100%. Those losses aren't as big as that quad of people that the Steelers played without. So it's set up for the Browns to make a statement, and then they get up 10-0. And the fact that they can't finish it is an indictment on the coaching staff and the players. And I think Freddie's right when he said, I don't know if he used these words, but his point was, we weren't ready. And maybe that's true. And we've talked before about how there's not a whole lot of winning experience on this roster, right? OBJ's been to one playoff game and lost. Jarvis has been to one playoff game and lost. Burnett had been to playoff games with the Packers, but he's not there anymore. Randall has limited experience. There's not a whole lot of guys that have won a whole lot of games. And maybe that showed up in a playoff atmosphere. In the biggest game of the season, And that's disappointing. And it makes you wonder, all right, well, then what do you have to do? Is it automatic that next time you're in that situation, you play better just because you were there before? Now, maybe. And maybe Freddie will coach better. And he said it Monday, and I wrote about it last night, that, next time I think we'll be better. And I expect us to coach better next time and play better next time. And that's fine. But, I just, you got the growing pains and you got the learning curve. Nothing says you can't win while going through those things. And they couldn't do it, and they couldn't do it in a game where they were the favorite to win on the road in Pittsburgh for the first time in 30 years. I thought they were going to win. I thought they were clearly the more talented team. And to not get it done says something about their mental makeup, their intestinal fortitude, all of that. And that is devastating or disturbing, whatever word you want to use. That's the big takeaway, is this team's not ready. And if you're John Dorsey and Jimmy Haslam and D. Haslam, that's a tough pill to swallow.
That's a real tough pill to swallow. And I think what's becoming a more difficult pill to swallow is that as great as Baker Mayfield was a season ago, he's really kind of come back down to earth a little bit this year. Now, that's not to say that he hasn't improved. I mean, look, there are weeks where it's seemed as though he has turned that proverbial corner. We've talked about this in recent weeks, where in the middle of the year, he's starting to look a little bit more like the world beater he was a season ago. But, Scott, maybe we've reached this point already, but, you always hear about the honeymoon period. And you have to think that that's over and done with for Baker Mayfield. I mean, as a first overall pick, there are expectations that are always going to be there. So I don't know how much of a factor that plays into this. And, not that Baker's the reason that they're losing, but you talked about it. In an environment like that, you expect big-time players to make big-time plays. And I'm not sure if we're at that point just yet. I mean, have we reached the end of the honeymoon period for Baker Mayfield?
That might be safe to say. I think we've reached it. I mean, we reached it early with Freddie, right? That honeymoon ended early. I think we've reached it with John Dorsey, the GM. I think people are starting to question some John Dorsey moves, and that includes the hiring of Freddie Kitchens. And I think that's probably true with Baker. I think there's way more support out there for Baker, and I think justifiably so. I had a lead last week. The story was about deep balls and how they'd finally connected on some deep balls. But I think my lead was something like, Baker's back, and so is the deep ball. And I don't like to think that I jumped to conclusions. I thought Baker played well for like 5 weeks in a row. And I thought that was a sign that he had kind of gotten back to where he was as a rookie. And he didn't play awful against Pittsburgh, but he had a huge turnover in that third quarter, that fumble, where he looked like a rookie. He's carrying the ball in his left hand, then he puts it back in his right hand. And, he had the bruised hand with the glove. But I don't think that's why he fumbled. He was just careless with the ball, turns into a strip sack, gives Pittsburgh great field position, and they kick the field goal that takes them from 7-10. And that's huge in that game, which you knew was going to be low scoring. When the Browns get down 10, and it's not just Freddie Kitchens, most play callers would do this, then they abandon the run, which takes away your strength, which leaves Baker susceptible to the pass rush that the tackles are struggling, and the guard, Whiteteller, were struggling to block. So it's a huge play in the game for him to fumble and go down 10. And then Baker in the fourth quarter, he's got the 38. He's a 38th rated quarterback in the league in the third quarter. And they only rank 38, right? There's only 32 teams. And his rating is, I wrote it today, I don't know, it's 50-something or 35-something. It's terrible because he's got 3 touchdowns and 7 picks. And the problem is he keeps throwing picks as he's trying to lead comebacks in the fourth quarter. And you want your quarterback to be more clutch than that. And there's plenty of factors that go into it. And maybe Jarvis ran the wrong route there, right? And that's a speculation. And he got into it with Ryan Lindley, the quarterback's coach, on the sideline. They kind of had to be separated a little bit. And you can see when you watch a replay, Jarvis angles it in just slightly. And Baker kind of throws it if he's going to run straight. And it looks like it's behind him, and maybe it would have been behind him regardless. And it's wrong route is probably too strong. It's more of not being on the same page, right? You have to read a defense and know where the hole in the zone is. And I think Jarvis is running it going, you know what? I like just running a shade in because I think it takes me away from Joe Hayden. And Baker's looking at it going, you know what? I see Minkah Fitzpatrick in the middle. I like him straight down the seam. And that could lead to an interception, right? Because there's obviously not on the same page. I don't think Baker missed him by that much. So, like I said, it's not all Baker's fault. And the protection didn't hold up like you'd want it to against Pittsburgh. But you need your quarterback and you need your number one pick in the draft to make some of those big plays. So, yeah, it's not all his fault. Jarvis could have held on to the one ball at the 2-yard line after the interception that would have changed the game. But I need my quarterback to make more plays in big moments on the road against Pittsburgh, and it didn't happen. He got the ball back with 1:40-something left to win the game, I think, because Devlin Hodges threw it out of bounds for some reason, or threw an incompletion, right, instead of running 40 more seconds off the clock. He had a chance, and he couldn't do it. And I think that goes against Baker, just like the fact that he didn't finish the comeback against the Rams, and he didn't finish the comeback against the Seahawks. Again, not all his fault. And balls go off guys' hands, and that's not his fault. I need my quarterback to overcome some of that. So, yeah, I think you can leave that game with Pittsburgh going. He had 2 big turnovers in the second half, huge plays in the game. I'm not happy. I'm not satisfied with where my quarterback is. And to make it worse, you contrast it with Devlin Hodges, who's an undrafted guy at Samford, and he makes enough deep throws down the sideline to win without his number one receiver, without his number one running back. So Baker, and it's not just Baker. I'm going to keep saying that. But Baker this year lost to Brandon Allen, who'd never played before for the Broncos, and Devlin Hodges, who shouldn't be, who nobody expected to be playing at this time in the year.
2 more things I want to hit on before we scratch the surface on this Bengals game on Sunday, which really kind of seems to have lost a lot of its luster, right? Just a little bit. But I want to hit on Chris Smith getting released earlier today. That was some breaking news earlier this morning. And, well, it really seems like that's shocked a lot of the Browns fans around the area.
Yeah, it's more sad to me because we all know what Chris went through this year. And in case we've forgotten, his girlfriend was killed in a tragic car accident September 11th, right? He had a tire blowout on the highway. They pulled off. As they're standing on the side of the highway waiting for help, some woman drives into him and kills the girlfriend. She's 26. Chris is 27. And to make it even more unthinkable, they'd had a baby girl a month earlier, right? So that's all the stuff Chris is going through this season. And yet he came back and played that week. And then his playing time has dropped off. And he was a healthy scratch against New England. He was a healthy scratch Sunday against Pittsburgh. And he got passed in the rotation by Brian Cox and Porter Gustin, who just got, they just signed both these guys recently. So that was obviously the writing on the wall. And maybe he's distracted, and maybe he's not the same player, and that's completely understandable, right? So I know it's football. I know it's a business. It's just sad that Chris has had this type of year and that it couldn't end better. Like the Browns couldn't have kept him to get to the offseason and then kind of see what happens, give him a chance to catch his breath. And I talked to Chris 2 weeks ago because he was going to start. We thought he was going to start. He wound up not starting before the Miami game. And, I said, hey, I'm not going to, I'm not going to talk to you too much about this, but just how you do it, like how you getting through everything. And he said, hey, I'm getting used to the new norm off the field. He said the baby girl lives with him. But it was Thanksgiving, so he let the in-laws, the deceased girlfriend's parents take her. He goes, but I want her back for Christmas. And just the way he said it was really cute. And Chris always has a big smile. He's a great guy to talk to. And he said, hey, I've been through everything in football. So the fact that I'm not playing is not a big deal. He goes, I've been traded for a bag of Skittles. So I think he'll take this in stride. It's just a sad ending for, it's a tragic year. And obviously him getting cut doesn't compare to what happened, off the field. But it's just a sad year, and he's going to be missed. Guys in the locker room will miss him. Guys in the building will miss him because he had that kind of personality and positive energy.
And those are tough guys to find. As strange as that sounds, those glue guys are awfully difficult to find. All right, well, we need to hit on Odell Beckham Jr. here, Scott, just because it really seems like the frustration is mounting for OBJ. I mean, this is the million-dollar question, but, why can't they find ways to consistently get him the ball? And I think that's everybody's wondering why in the world they can't find ways to get it to him. And I guess the bigger question is, how much longer is he going to be able to kind of keep quiet about this?
Well, that's another one of those million-dollar questions, right? And we'll be back in Berea Wednesday, and that's something that I'm high alert for, right? I want to talk to Demarius Randall and see what the heck happened last week, why he didn't play. Did he skip practice? I mean, there's all kinds of thoughts out there. I want to get his version. And then I want to talk to Odell. Odell did not talk after the game, left the locker room before reporters were in there, which is unusual for him. He's been good after the game. He's been good guy to talk to all year. But to me, that signals the frustration boiling over, right? And not only is it a huge loss, he got 3 catches for 29 yards. That's his 3rd game with 3 or fewer catches this year. He's on pace for still good numbers. I think he's on pace for 1,000 yards still, but he's not going to get to where he was with the Giants. He's not going to get those numbers where everybody's used to him having. He probably won't be a Pro Bowler, right? And I think it's all mounting, and I want to see how he handles it. I mean, he's been good with us so far. You see glimpses of the frustration, but he hasn't had an outburst. He hasn't really ripped anybody. Kind of like Jarvis ripped the play calling back in the day, and Odell stayed out of it. So I will be on alert for that, just to see if it's bubbling over or if he can keep it to himself. Say, hey, there's 4 games left. Maybe something will happen. Maybe we'll figure it out. He's got the Jarvis dynamic is fascinating because it's his best friend, and Jarvis is having a good year. Jarvis has passed him in touchdowns and catches and yards. So I don't think Odell can be mad about that because it's his guy doing it, but he can still say, where's mine, right? And I get it, and that's how skilled players are, and that's how extremely talented players are, and that's Odell obviously falls into that category. And I thought you saw that frustration when he made a 19-yard catch in the 4th quarter right on the Browns sideline, and he catches it, and he comes up, and I phrased it when I asked Freddie barking, and maybe that's not the right word, but he looks at the sideline, and it looks like he's looking at Freddie. You can't tell exactly who he's looking at, but he says something, like yells something, and yells it again, and kind of stares over at the sideline a little bit. And I don't know if it's let's go, but I took it as, look what happens when you throw me the ball. We get 19 yards, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's natural, and I think that's where his mental state is, at least in game, is let me help. Give me the ball. Let me do something. And so, yeah, I'm interested to see how he reacts, how he handles it. Having said that, my mind is still blown that they can't figure out a way to get him the ball more. It shouldn't be that hard. Run some 6-yard hooks, and they do every once in a while, and you see, and then they go away from it. And I thought it was interesting and confounding that Baker and Freddie said after the game, we had some deep stuff dialed up for Odell, but we weren't able to get to it because the protection didn't hold up. Well, I knew the protection wasn't going to hold up. You knew the protection wasn't going to hold up. Justin McCray starting for Greg Robinson at left tackle. That's a huge downgrade. Chris Hubbard is facing TJ Watt, who is really good, and they're even better at home. So you knew Watt and Dupree were going to get pressure on Baker. So I don't think it's wisest move to have Odell's part of the game plan be 35 yards downfield, and I think there needed to be a bigger adjustment. Now, Freddie will tell you, when we wanted to take those shots, we were going to give help to the tackles. We thought we could still do it. You can't abandon the deep shots, but there's got to be a happy medium in there, and maybe that's what Odell was frustrated about.
Well, we'll see if they can get him the ball a little more often on Sunday against the Bengals. And, it seems like this matchup has lost a little bit of its intrigue. The Bengals just having a miserable season. The Browns, to this point, have failed to meet expectations. What about this matchup on Sunday intrigues you?
Well, I think one of the intriguing points was erased when the Bengals won last week, right? Because the Bengals lose and come in the game 0-12, then we're talking about the chase for 0-16.
Uh-huh.
Can they match the Browns from a few years ago, right? So I think it's good for the Browns that the Bengals aren't motivated to win because no team wants to go winless. So the fact that they got it out of the way, maybe they partied all week or are going to party all week in Cincinnati, and they come in and don't care against the Browns, and the Browns will run them off the field. But maybe they feel the monkey's off the back, they play free, and they come in with nothing to lose, and the Browns have a fight on their hands. And the Browns, I think it'd be reasonable to think that the Browns could have a letdown after the loss in Pittsburgh, after their playoff hopes, all the stuff we talked about, right? It would be hard to get up to the motivation that you've had the last 4 weeks with what went out the window in Pittsburgh. Now, they do know that the playoffs are still possible, so I think that's a motivation. And I would expect the Browns to beat Cincinnati. But it's not going to be super easy, especially with the fact that Andy Dalton's back at quarterback. And you can say all you want about Andy Dalton, and I know he never won a playoff game. He's still a competent NFL quarterback. And he might start for somebody next year. Like, he's that type of player. And they're a way better team with him at the controls than with him out at with him not starting, and with, I think it was Ryan Finley was their quarterback, and he was struggling immensely. So I think Dalton in the lineup gives him a chance. I don't think A.J. Green's going to be back. If A.J. Green came back for the first time all year, then I think that's another element, and the Browns would have to be worried more about that. But they have playmakers on offense. They have Tyler Boyd. They have a couple of running backs that Browns fans are familiar with. Joe Mixon's a good player. So, they're not talented. They're 1-11. But the Browns can't just overlook the game, and they have to know that, number one, in order to have any chance at the playoffs, they have to sweep the Bengals. Number two, it gives them a chance to go at least 4-2 in the division, maybe 5-1. The Browns have never been 4-2 or 5-1, I don't think, in the AFC North. And from a Freddie Kitchens perspective, he needs every win he can get, right? I mean, that's going to be number one when you look at the end of the year if the Haslam's and Dorsey decide they have a decision to make. And maybe it's silly to even talk about it after 1 year in the NFL as a coach. But we've seen coaches get fired in this league after 1 year. And we all know the expectations around Freddie around this team entering the year. He gets to the end, 8-8 looks way better than 6-10, right? I mean, 8-8, 9-7. I think it would be more difficult for a coaching change to be made given a 500 or a winning record. And if you start losing to the Bengals, it's hard for Freddie to make that case of keep me. The team plays hard for me. We improved from last year. If you go 7-9, you haven't improved from last year. It's a half-game step back. Way disappointing. You lost games you shouldn't have lost. So while there won't be the excitement level that there would have been if the Browns had won in Pittsburgh, it's still an important game.
Yeah, these are all important because, again, mathematically, they are still alive in this playoff race. Scott, as always, a pleasure. Never a dull moment with this Browns team. Jeez, oh, man.
You're starting to pick that up, huh?
Yeah, never a dull moment. But you and I will have a chance to do this again next week after the first of 2 more games left this season against the Cincinnati Bengals. All right, so always appreciate the time, Scott. We'll do it again next week.
Thanks, Andy. It was great.
All right, that's Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, Medina Gazette, and, of course, BrownZone.com. That'll wrap things up on this edition of the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to all of you again next week.